The elevator smelled like lavender and exhaustion. Sophia had been on her feet for 11 hours. 11 hours of scrubbing marble floors, folding sheets so crisp they could cut paper, and smiling at guests who looked through her like she was part of the wallpaper. Her uniform was still neat, her edges still laid. Her soul? Somewhere on the 14th floor, probably tangled in a fitted sheet. She pushed her cleaning cart into the service elevator of Haeon Tower, the most expensive residential building in all of Seoul, pressed the button for the basement, and leaned against the wall with a sigh that came from her entire ancestry. Now, before we go any further, if you have ever worked a job that tried to take your whole spirit and return you nothing but a paycheck, you already love Sophia. Stay with me, because what happens next in this elevator is going to change her life forever. Watch this all the way to the end, because the moment this man sees her, nothing in Seoul will ever be the same. And if you are new here, welcome to the channel. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and let's go. Sophia had not meant to fall asleep. She had meant to close her eyes for exactly 30 seconds while the elevator descended. Just 30 seconds. She deserved 30 seconds. But what Sophia did not know, what she could not have known, was that earlier that afternoon, one of the hotel guests had accidentally knocked a small bottle of aromatherapy sleep solution into the ventilation gap of the service elevator. It was a product marketed as Gentle Relaxation Mist. The reviews on the box called it sublimely effective. The reviews were not lying. By the time the elevator reached the 3rd floor, Sophia was gone. Not gone as in left. Gone as in asleep the way only truly tired people sleep. Deeply, completely, with her head tilted against the wall and her hand still resting on the cart handle, like even unconscious she was trying to be responsible. The elevator stopped, not at the basement. Because the elevator, being the dramatic piece of machinery that it was, malfunctioned. Instead of going down, it went up. All the way up. To the top floor. The penthouse floor. The floor that was not accessible to staff. The floor that required a special key card, a retinal scan, and, apparently, the favor of God. The doors opened, and Ryu Sejin looked up from his phone. Ryu Sejin was not a man you looked at casually. He was the kind of man you looked at and then immediately looked away from because something in your brain told you that sustained eye contact with this particular human being was a health risk. He was tall, not aggressively tall, but tall enough. He had the kind of face that sculptors would describe as a problem. Sharp jaw, careful eyes, the sort of expression that never quite told you what he was thinking, but made you very aware that he was thinking something. He was also, as of this moment, the acting head of the Haeon Syndicate, one of the most quietly powerful criminal organizations in South Korea. They did not advertise. They did not threaten loudly. They simply existed, and everything around them adjusted accordingly. Sejin had been expecting a package. He had not been expecting a sleeping woman in a maid's uniform with a cleaning cart, a laminated name tag that said Sophia, and an expression of pure peace on her face. He stared at her for a long moment. She did not stir. He looked at his head of security, Baek Junho, who was standing 2 feet away with the expression of a man who had seen many things in his career, but was currently experiencing something new. "Why?" Sejin said slowly. "Is there a woman sleeping in my elevator?" Junho cleared his throat. "She appears to be a cleaning staff member, sir." "I can see the uniform, Junho." "Yes, sir." "Why is she asleep?" "Unknown, sir." Sejin looked at Sophia again. She shifted slightly in her sleep and let out a small sound. Not quite a snore, not quite a sigh. Something in between. Something that, under different circumstances, might have been endearing. "Wake her up," Sejin said. Junho stepped forward, cleared his throat loudly, and said, in his most professional voice, "Excuse me, miss. You are on a restricted floor." Sophia slept. Junho tried again, louder. Sophia turned her head slightly and said, in a voice thick with sleep, "I already cleaned that room." Junho looked at his boss. His boss looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. "She's talking in her sleep," Junho said finally. "I noticed." "Should I, physically?" "Do not touch her," Sejin said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this was less an ethical stance and more a personal preference for not having strangers' sleeping energy transferred to his security team. He walked to the elevator himself and stood in front of Sophia. He looked at her name tag. He looked at her face. She had good bone structure, excellent skin, a small scar above her left eyebrow that looked like it had a story behind it. He said quietly, "Sophia." She did not wake up, but she smiled, just slightly, in her sleep, as if whatever she was dreaming about had said something nice. Sejin stood there with that smile aimed at him, because he was the only one in front of her, and felt something strange happen in his chest, something brief and confusing that he immediately filed away under irrelevant and closed the folder. "Bring her inside," he said. "Put her on the guest room bed. Do not go through her things. Post someone at the door. And find out how she got up here." Junho blinked. "Sir, protocol would suggest—" "Junho?" "Yes, sir." They moved Sophia to the guest room. She did not wake up once. When they laid her on the bed, carefully, because Sejin had watched to make sure it was done carefully, for security reasons, obviously, she curled onto her side, pulled the pillow toward her, and sighed the sigh of a woman who had finally found rest. Sejin stood at the door for a moment too long. Then he turned and walked back to his study. Sophia woke up at 6:47 in the morning. She knew it was 6:47 because she had the internal clock of a woman who had been catching early buses her entire life. She opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling, and thought, "This is not my ceiling." She sat up. She was in the most beautiful room she had ever been in. The sheets were the kind of soft that made you question everything about your previous life. The ceiling had subtle gold detail work. The window was enormous, looked out over all of Seoul, which was waking up in pink and gold morning light, like a city that had decided to be beautiful today, just for her. Sophia looked at this view for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked down at herself, still in her uniform, shoes still on, cleaning cart nowhere in sight, and said, very calmly, "Where am I?" It was not a question. It was a statement. The kind a woman makes when she is giving reality one final chance to explain itself before she panics. She got up. She went to the door. She opened it. Junho was standing outside. Junho was a large man, not in a threatening way, in a way that suggested he had been built specifically for standing in doorways and making people reconsider their next move. Sophia looked at him. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. "Where am I?" "The Haeon Tower penthouse, ma'am." Sophia took that information in. She processed it the way you process a phone bill that is higher than it should be, slowly, with increasing alarm. "How did I get here?" "You fell asleep in the service elevator. It malfunctioned and came up here. And instead of waking me up and sending me back downstairs, someone brought me to a penthouse bedroom?" "Yes, ma'am." "Whose penthouse?" Junho paused, not because he did not know the answer, because he was calculating how much of the answer to give. "Mr. Ryu's," he said finally. "Mr. Ryu," Sophia repeated. "Who is Mr. Ryu?" "He is the owner of this floor." "Does Mr. Ryu make a habit of collecting sleeping women from elevators?" Junho's face did not move. "No, ma'am. You are the first." Sophia decided that was somehow worse. She straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair with her hands, and said, "I need to speak to him, and I need my cart." "Your cart has been secured in the service corridor." "Great. Lead me to Mr. Ryu." Junho looked uncertain, in the way that large, trained security professionals looked uncertain. Barely, but enough. Mr. Ryu is having breakfast. So am I about to be, Sophia said. Let's go. Ryu Sejin was sitting at the long breakfast table on the penthouse terrace with a cup of black coffee and a tablet when he heard footsteps. He looked up. Sophia was walking toward him like she owned the floor. Not aggressively, not rudely. Simply with the energy of a woman who had decided that if she was going to be in an unfamiliar situation, she was going to be in it with her whole chest. Sejin put down his coffee. She stopped a reasonable distance from the table, met his eyes, and said, "Good morning. I'm Sophia. I'm on the housekeeping staff. I apparently fell asleep in your elevator last night, and someone brought me up here, which I appreciate because I'm sure the floor was not comfortable. I'd like to thank you for the room, apologize for the intrusion, and ask if I could have 5 minutes to sort myself out before I go explain to my supervisor why I vanished." Sejin looked at her. She did not look away. Most people looked away. "Sit down," he said. "I don't want to take up your time, Sophia." He said her name the same way he had said it last night. Quiet, direct, like a period at the end of a sentence. "Sit down. Have breakfast. Then I'll have someone escort you to your supervisor and explain the elevator situation personally." She blinked. "You'd do that?" "I own the building," he said simply. "It is my elevator." Sophia sat down. She sat across from him, and for a moment they just existed in the same space, which was strange because Ryu Sejin did not share breakfast with people. He barely shared oxygen. His team ate in their quarters, his meetings happened in his study. His mornings were his own, always. Yet here was this woman in yesterday's uniform, with her edges still miraculously intact, eating a croissant across from him like she had been invited. "You're American," he said. "African American," she said, "from Atlanta, moved to Seoul 2 years ago." "For work?" "For a lot of things." She looked out at the city. Something passed through her eyes, not sadness, not quite, something more layered. Seoul was supposed to be a fresh start. And was it? She looked back at him. "I'm a maid in an expensive building. It's a start." Something in his face shifted. Not into pity, Sejin did not do pity. Into something closer to respect, the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself. "Why Korea specifically?" he asked. "I grew up watching K-dramas," she said, and then laughed a little, like she was aware of how that sounded. "I know, but I fell in love with the culture, the food, the language. I learned Korean in 2 years. I wanted to experience it for real, not through a screen." She paused. "Also, my ex was terrible, and a change of continent seemed appropriate." Sejin almost smiled. Almost. "And the ex?" "Still in Atlanta, still terrible. Thriving, probably." She said it without bitterness, with the peace of a woman who had fully released that chapter. Sejin looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee. "You speak Korean?" "Ne," she said. "Yes." "Not perfectly, but enough." "Your pronunciation is good." "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "You speak English very well." "I went to school in the UK." "Ah, that explains the coffee at breakfast instead of tea." He looked at her. She held his gaze. And there it was again, that strange thing in his chest, that folder he kept trying to close. She left an hour later with a penthouse-level apology delivered to her supervisor by Junho himself, who knocked on Mrs. Park's office door and said, in the tone of a man who expected no resistance, that the situation had been a building malfunction and Ms. Sophia would face no disciplinary action. Mrs. Park, who was 62 and had worked in hospitality for 40 years, looked at Junho, looked at his suit, looked at the subtle earpiece, and said, "Of course. Because some apologies you simply accept." Sophia went back to work. She told herself the breakfast was a one-time thing, an anomaly, a story she would tell one day. "I once accidentally fell asleep in a Mafia boss's elevator and he gave me a croissant." Except she did not know he was a Mafia boss. Not yet. What she knew was that he had dark eyes that stayed on her face when she spoke, as if what she was saying actually mattered. She knew he had said her name twice, and both times it had felt like something. She knew she had laughed at her own breakfast table with a stranger, and it had felt easier than laughing had felt in a long time. She did not think about him again. She made herself not think about him. She thought about him all day. 3 days later, Sophia was restocking the linen closet on the 42nd floor when she heard two of the other cleaning staff talking in hushed tones. She understood enough Korean by now to catch the important words. The penthouse man. View Sejin. They say he's Han. Sophia kept folding sheets. Han? The second woman whispered. Like, that Han? The one and only. My cousin's husband works at a restaurant near Gangnam-gu. He says if Ryu Sejin walks in, everyone else walks out. Quietly, no drama, they just leave. Aigu. The second woman fanned herself with a towel. And he's up there? In our building? Has been for months. Very private. Very, she lowered her voice further. Powerful. Sophia folded another sheet. She thought about the man who had said her name like a period, who had listened to her talk about K-dramas and her terrible ex with the same focused attention he probably gave to things that actually mattered, who had said, "It is my elevator," with such complete calm. She thought, of course he was. She was going to avoid him. She had a plan. The plan was excellent. The plan was, do not go anywhere near the penthouse floor, do not take the service elevator if it might malfunction again, and do not, under any circumstances, think about dark eyes and croissants. The plan lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, she was called to the penthouse. Not by choice, not by accident. Mrs. Park called her into the office and said, "The penthouse resident has requested you specifically for his weekly deep clean." Sophia looked at her supervisor. Me specifically. He said, and I am reading this directly, the American woman, Sophia, she knows what she's doing. Mrs. Park raised an eyebrow. I don't know what you did up there, but well done. Sophia did not know what she had done either. She went. The penthouse in daylight was something else entirely. All glass and clean lines, and views that made the city look like it was performing just for you. Sophia started in the kitchen, which was enormous and barely used because men like Sejin apparently had people who cooked for them, and worked her way through the living spaces with the focus of a woman who was absolutely professionally not thinking about the owner. She was wiping down the long window when she heard him. You came. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of his study, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who had been working since before Seoul woke up. You requested me, she said. I did. Why? He considered the question with the seriousness he seemed to give everything. You didn't treat the space like it scared you. Most people are different when they're in here. You were just, he paused, yourself. Sophia looked at him. Is that rare for you? People being themselves around you? Something moved across his face, quick, real. Yes. She turned back to the window. That's lonely, she said quietly. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that had weight, the kind that meant something had been said that both people heard. Your Korean is better than you gave yourself credit for, he said finally, switching to Korean. She answered in Korean, without looking away from the glass. I practice every day. I'm not afraid of being bad at something while I'm learning it. He watched her for a moment. Then, in Korean, most people are. She smiled at the window. I'm not most people. No, Sejin thought, you are clearly not. The deep clean became weekly, and then twice a week. And Sophia told herself it was just a job, a very good paying assignment that Mrs. Park was thrilled about, but she knew the truth was more complicated than that. Because Sejin had started to linger. Not obviously, not in the way of a man who was trying, in the way of a man who was trying not to, who kept finding reasons to be in whatever room she was in, asking questions about her life in the careful voice of someone constructing a picture piece by piece. He learned that she had a younger sister back in Atlanta who called her every Sunday. That she ate ramyeon for dinner 3 nights a week because she hadn't mastered Korean cooking yet and was too proud to admit it. That she had a playlist she listened to while she cleaned, a mix of Afrobeats and old K-pop, and that she sang under her breath when she thought no one could hear her. He could always hear her. He never said anything, but he started making sure there was ramyun in the kitchen on her cleaning days. Just there, in the cabinet, as if it had always been there. Sophia noticed. She said nothing. But one Tuesday she finished her shift, packed her cart, and left a small container of jollof rice on his kitchen counter with a post-it note that said, "Since you keep feeding me, fair is fair." Sejin came home to it at 11 p.m., after a meeting that had gone 3 hours too long and involved two men making very poor decisions. He sat at his kitchen counter, ate the jollof rice cold, it was extraordinary, warm or cold, and read the post-it note 4 times. He kept the post-it note. He would never tell anyone that he kept the post-it note. The problem arrived on a Thursday. His name was Choi Man-sik. He was the second-ranking member of a rival faction that had been testing the Haeon syndicate's edges for months. Small provocations, missing shipments, whispered challenges. He was also, unfortunately, a guest in Haeon Tower, because the building had commercial floors and one of the businesses was legitimately his. Sejin knew Man-sik was in the building. Man-sik knew Sejin knew. It was the kind of tense coexistence that worked fine until it didn't. It stopped working on a Thursday when Man-sik stepped into the same hallway as Sophia. Sophia was pushing her cart between rooms on the 28th floor. She was listening to her playlist. She was singing, quietly, she thought, though she was doing it a little louder than she realized. A song that was half Afrobeats melody and half Korean lyrics she had written herself, because she did that sometimes when no one was around. Man-sik turned the corner and stopped. He looked at her the way some men look at women they have decided are things rather than people, assessing, presumptuous, unpleasant. "You work here?" he said in Korean. "Yes," Sophia said simply, and moved to go around him. He stepped in her way. Not aggressively, just enough. "American?" "Yes." "You're far from home." "I live here now." Her voice was level. She had dealt with this kind of man before, in Atlanta, in Seoul, in the in-between spaces of a life that kept requiring her to prove she belonged somewhere. She was not afraid of him. She was tired of him, and she hadn't even been in the same hallway with him for 30 seconds. "You must know whose building this is," Man-sik said, still in Korean. Still with that smile that meant nothing good. "I work here," Sophia said. "I don't keep track of ownership." "Smart girl." He looked her up and down. Pretty, too. Sophia smiled at him. The smile was pleasant and completely empty. "Have a nice day, sir." She pushed her cart around him and walked away with the posture of a woman who had decided this interaction was over, whether he knew it or not. She did not tell Sejin. She was not someone who needed to report to anyone. She handled herself. But Junho saw it on the security footage, and Junho told Sejin. Sejin watched the footage once. He watched the way Man-sik positioned himself. He watched Sophia's face, steady, unimpressed, quietly formidable. He watched her walk away. Then he watched Man-sik watch her walk away. He closed the footage. He called Man-sik's business manager and informed them that the commercial lease agreement would not be renewed. The message was delivered in perfectly ordinary business language. It did not require explanation. Man-sik would understand. Sophia never knew any of this happened. She found out he was Han on a Saturday. Not from gossip this time, from a news article on her phone during her lunch break, which mentioned the Han syndicate in the context of a city council story that made her stop eating her kimbap. The article mentioned the syndicate head. It mentioned the name Ryu. It mentioned Han Tower. Sophia put down her kimbap. She sat with this information for a long time. She thought about the morning on the terrace, the croissant, the way he listened, the ramyun in the cabinet, the post-it note she had left that he had, she was fairly certain, kept because she had not seen it in the trash. She thought about what it meant to work in his building, to clean his home, to sing in his kitchen while he was in the other room. She thought about the fact that none of it had felt dangerous. That was what confused her. She had not felt scared of him, not once, not even the first morning when she woke up in a stranger's bed and found out a large man was standing outside her door. She had felt, And this was the uncomfortable truth. Comfortable. Seen. That was scarier than anything. She went back to work. She did not avoid him after that. She thought she would. She had prepared herself to be different, cooler, more careful, sensible. She walked into the penthouse that Tuesday with her cart and her armor and her excellent plan. He was at the breakfast table when she arrived. He looked up. He said, "There's coffee if you want it." Sophia looked at him. He looked back. She put her cart by the wall, went to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and sat across from him. "I know who you are," she said. "I know," he said. "You could have told me." "What would you have done if I had?" She thought about it honestly. Probably been different, probably been careful. "Yes," he said, "that's why I didn't tell you." He looked at her steadily. "I liked you being yourself." Sophia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Outside, Seoul was doing what it did, moving, bright, enormous, indifferent to the small, extraordinary thing happening on the top floor. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know. That doesn't mean I trust you." "I know that too." He leaned back slightly. "But you're still sitting here." She looked at him. He was right. She was sitting here. With her coffee. In his kitchen. After knowing what she knew. "You kept the post-it note," she said. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Ryu Seijin." "Sophia." "You kept it." A pause. "It was a good note." She laughed. The real one. Full, surprised, the kind that got away from her. And Seijin watched her laugh the way someone watches something they have been hungry for without knowing it. What came after was not simple. Nothing about Ryu Seijin's life was simple, and Sophia had not moved to a different continent to choose simple. There was the problem of the faction tension, which escalated in the weeks that followed into something that required Seijin to disappear for 4 days without explanation, leaving Junho to vaguely assure Sophia that everything was fine in a tone that suggested things were not entirely fine. There was the problem of Sophia's sister, Kezia, who called from Atlanta and said, "You sound different, the way sisters do when they can hear something you haven't said yet," and Sophia spent 20 minutes insisting she was exactly the same before admitting, "I might have a situation." Kezia said, "Define situation." Sophia said, "There's a man." Kezia said, "Is he fine?" Sophia closed her eyes. Kezia said, "I'll take that as a yes. What's the problem?" Sophia thought about the syndicate, about Mansik, about the weight of a life that ran on power she didn't fully understand. "He's complicated." Kezia said, "Baby, every man worth anything is complicated. What does he make you feel like?" Sophia sat with that. "Like I make sense," she said finally, quietly. "Like all the things I am just make sense around him." There was a long silence. Then Kezia said, "Oh no, you're already in it." There was also the problem of Sophia's own pride, which was substantial and architecturally sound, and had kept her standing through worse than this. She was not someone who rearranged herself for a man. She was not someone who softened her edges because someone else found them inconvenient. She had done that before, in Atlanta, and it had cost her things she was still recovering. She told Seijin this, one evening on his terrace, when the city was all lit up and the conversation had reached the kind of depth that happens when two careful people finally stop being careful. "I don't want you to be different," he said, simply. "I need you to understand that." She looked at him. The lights of Seoul were behind him, and he looked like something a city made instead of a person. "You say that now," she said. "I will say it again whenever you need to hear it." She was quiet. Then, "The women in your world are in my world," he said. "You are something else." "What am I?" He looked at her for a long time. "The reason I come home," he said finally, in Korean, low, like it had been waiting inside him for a while and had finally found the door. Sophia looked away, at the city, at the lights that had welcomed her 2 years ago when she had arrived on a flight from Atlanta with a rolling suitcase, a language app, and a hope she couldn't fully explain. She had not expected to find this. She had not been looking for this. I make jollof rice on Sundays, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I know. If you wanted to come, she paused, to have dinner, sometime, you could. Another pause. You would cook for me? I would cook for myself and allow you to be in the same room. She glanced at him sideways. Don't make it weird. The almost smile appeared, the one she had started cataloging. I won't make it weird. Good. Sophia. Sejin. Sunday, he said. Sunday, she confirmed. And Seoul glittered below them like it knew something good was beginning. The jollof rice Sunday became a thing. Not every Sunday. Some Sundays Sejin was unreachable, in rooms Sophia did not have access to, making decisions she was not part of. She had accepted that there were parts of his world she could not enter, and parts of hers he would have to learn to meet. That was honest. That was real. But the Sundays he was there, those Sundays were something. He came to her apartment, which was on the 6th floor of a building 20 minutes from Howen Tower, small and warm and covered in the things she had collected in 2 years of making Seoul hers. A cloth from her grandmother, a small painting she'd bought in Insadong, photos of her sister, a poster from a K-drama she loved. He came in a car that had no business parking on her street. He wore slightly less formal clothes that were still somehow pressed within an inch of their lives. He brought wine, always the right kind, which annoyed her because it meant he had done research, and sat in her small kitchen and watched her cook without offering to help, because she had told him on the second Sunday that she cooked alone, and asking to help was interference. He learned to just be there, sitting, existing in her space without trying to fill it with himself. This was rarer than the wine. She taught him about jollof rice, about Nigerian cooking terms, about the way her grandmother had taught her that food was love made edible. He was a careful student. He remembered everything. On the third Sunday, he asked a question about tomato ratios that meant he had actually been paying attention, and Sophia had to focus very hard on the pot in front of her. He told her things, too. Not the syndicate things, those he carried alone, and she did not ask him to put them down. But other things. He had a younger brother in Busan who was irritatingly cheerful and called too often. He had studied economics in London and come home to a world that had already decided what his future was. He had learned early that power was quieter than people thought, that the men who needed to be loud about it were usually afraid of something. Are you afraid of anything? She asked once. He thought about it seriously, which she appreciated. Losing people I can't replace, he said. She looked at him across the table. How many of those do you have? He looked back at her. I'm counting. The complication they had both been circling arrived in October. A man from Sejin's past, a former associate who had left the syndicate on bad terms and had been building something dangerous ever since, made a move. It was calculated. It was designed to hurt Sejin where he was most exposed. He went for Sophia, not directly, carefully, the way people who are afraid to be direct move, through whispers, through interference, through an incident that looked like a robbery but was too clean to be random. Sophia was walking back from the market 2 streets from her apartment when 2 men approached her. She knew immediately that this was not a robbery. Their hands were wrong for it. Their positions were wrong. She was not stupid. She was from Atlanta. She had grown up knowing how to read a street. She turned around and walked directly into the convenience store on the corner, went to the counter and told the young man behind it, in Korean, that she believed she was being followed and asked if she could please stand here for a moment. The young man, to his eternal credit, said yes immediately and handed her a can of canned coffee like it was a social visit. She called Junho. Junho answered on the first ring. By the time Sejin arrived, faster than distance should have allowed, which meant he had been nearby, and she was going to think about what that meant later. The 2 men were gone, and Sophia was still in the convenience store, still holding the canned coffee, looking irritated rather than frightened. He walked in. He looked at her. His face was controlled in the way faces are controlled when the person wearing them has decided not to feel what they're feeling until later. Are you hurt? He said. No. Did they touch you? I didn't let them get close. He looked at her for a moment. Then something shifted. Not into the boss, into the man. Sophia, I know, she said quietly. I know this is your world coming into mine. She looked at the can in her hands. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I'm not going to pretend I'm not shaken. She looked up. But I'm also not going to pretend I want out. So let's skip the part where you look guilty. And tell me maybe this was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, he said immediately, like the words had been waiting. And go straight to you telling me what you're going to do about it. He looked at her, for a long, steady moment. Then quietly, everything. She put the canned coffee on the counter, thanked the young man, and walked to Sejin. She stopped in front of him, close. Closer than the professional distance they had maintained for months. Everything better be enough, she said. It will be, he said. Just that. She looked at his face, this face she had memorized over months of terraces and Sunday kitchens and silences that meant more than sentences, and felt something settle in her. Not the resolution of all the complications, not the end of all the difficulty, just the certainty that she was in the right place with the right person, which is a different thing entirely and often braver. Take me home, she said. Which home, he asked. She thought about her small apartment with the grandmother cloth and the Insadong painting. She thought about the penthouse with its gold ceiling details and its enormous windows, and a kitchen where the ramyun cabinet was always stocked. Mine, she said. For tonight. He nodded. They walked out of the convenience store and into the Seoul night, which received them without comment because cities like Seoul have seen everything and remain beautiful anyway. The months that followed were the kind of months people look back on and say, that was when things changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the slow, permanent shift of two people building something real in the space between their very different worlds. Sejin handled what needed to be handled. The former associate found that Seoul became a city where nothing worked for him anymore. No partnerships, no resources, no allies. He left, quietly, which was how Han handled things. Sophia got a promotion. Not because of Sejin. She made him promise to stay out of it, and he did, imperfectly but genuinely. But because she was extraordinary at her job, and Mrs. Park had 2 working eyes. She became a senior hospitality coordinator, which meant less cleaning and more managing, and a salary that let her send money home to Kezia without calculating it 3 times first. She still went to the penthouse, different capacity now. She told herself it was professional. It was not professional. It had not been professional for a long time. The first time he held her hand, really held it deliberately on the terrace on a Sunday when the city was doing its pink and gold thing, and neither of them had said anything for a while. He did not say anything about it. He just held it, and she let him. And they sat there in the good silence, the one that did not require filling, while Seoul carried on below them. Kezia flew out in December. She arrived at Incheon with a rolling suitcase, a long list of Korean restaurants she had researched, and an energy that preceded her into rooms. She met Sejin on the second day. Sejin met Kezia and understood immediately that this was a woman who was going to tell him the truth, whether he wanted it or not. He appreciated this. Kezia assessed him for approximately 90 seconds, and then turned to Sophia and said, in English, "Okay, yes, I understand." Sophia said, "Kezia." Kezia said, "No, genuinely, I understand everything. He has the face of someone who is absolutely a problem." She switched to Korean, which she had apparently been studying, and said to Sejin very directly, "You take care of my sister." Sejin, without hesitation, in Korean, "Yes." Kezia considered this. "Good." She looked at her sister. "He's a man of few words, but the words are right. I approve." Sophia put her face in her hands. Sejin looked quietly, privately pleased. On the last Sunday of the year, they were in Sophia's apartment. She was cooking. He was at the kitchen table, jacket off, reading something on his phone, looking impossibly comfortable in her small kitchen that had never been designed for someone of his particular atmosphere. She said without turning from the stove, "Do you remember the elevator?" "Yes," he said. "I looked so ridiculous." "You looked peaceful," he said, like someone who had decided the world could wait. She stirred the pot. "I never would have talked to you, you know that? If it had been a normal meeting, a guest and a housekeeper, I would have said hello and looked at the floor, and that would have been the end of it." "I know." "So the malfunctioning elevator." Was the best malfunction in the history of this building, he said, simply, like a fact. She turned and looked at him. This man who had an empire and said almost nothing and kept post-it notes and came to her small apartment on Sundays with the right wine. This man who had learned to sit in her space without trying to fill it. Who had said, "Take care of my sister," and meant it in his bones. "Ryu Seijin," she said. He looked up from his phone. "I'm glad I fell asleep in your elevator." Something happened to his face. Not the almost smile, something fuller, something real and unguarded that she had been working toward for months without naming it. "So am I," he said. In Korean. Low, like it was only for her. She turned back to the stove. She was smiling at the pot. He watched her smile. Seoul was outside the window, doing what Seoul does, moving, lit, enormous, gorgeous. But the room they were in was its own world. Small and warm and full of the smell of food and the particular peace of two people who had found each other through a ridiculous, perfect accident and decided to stay. And that for everyone who stayed until the end. That is the story of the sleeping maid and the mafia boss, and what a malfunctioning elevator can do when Seoul decides to be generous. If this story made you feel something, whether that was the butterflies or the laughing or that specific ache that good romance gives you, drop it in the comments. Tell me what moment got you. Was it the jollof rice, the post-it note he kept, Kezia flying in with her full energy? I want to know. And if you are new here and this is your first time on this channel, welcome. This is your home now. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, because there are more stories coming and they only get better. Every week we are here building a world where African women and Korean men fall in love in ways that feel true and beautiful and full of life. Like this video, if Sophia deserved every good thing she got. She did. She really did. I will see you in the next one.